Welcome to Storyflix. In this video, we will explain Marrying the Mafia. This movie tells the story of a gangster who insists a man marry a mobster's daughter after he spends a drunken night with her. Can the poor man be free from the entanglement of the mafia family that keeps forcing him to marry his daughter? Let's find out in Marrying the Mafia. Marrying the Mafia begins by showing a woman and a man who wake naked in a bedroom. They looked so panicked and surprised because they didn't know each other. The man named Park Dae-seo, a top graduate of Seoul University who is now one of the leaders in a telecommunications company. While the woman named Jang Jin-kyung, who works as a health analyzer in a laboratory. The two of them didn't know each other and had absolutely no recollection of last night's events until they ended up in bed completely naked. Jin-kyung is an innocent woman who feels tainted by what has just happened to her, so she decides to commit suicide. Dae-seo tries to stop the reckless act and calms her down. Finally, Jin-kyung feels calmer and decides to go home immediately after exchanging business cards with Dae-seo. But then, Dae-seo's girlfriend, Lee Yoo-jin, arrived at the man's residence. Arrogantly, Yoo-jin assumes that Jin-kyung is a prostitute. Arriving at the office, Dae-seo is asked to meet the guest who was waiting for him on the roof of the building. The guests are three men, who then beat him. It turns out that the three men are Jin-kyung's older brothers, namely In-Jae, Suk-Jae and Kyung-Jae. The trio apparently learned of the incident between Dae-seo and Jin-kyung last night and threatened Dae-seo to marry Jin-kyung for desecrating the woman, or his life will be at stake. Therefore, the three force Dae-seo to sign the agreement. That night, Dae-seo asks Jin-kyung to meet him at a restaurant and complains about what her brothers have used and forced upon him. Jin-kyung only apologizes to Dae-seo for what her brothers did to him. Meanwhile, at Jin-kyung's father's residence, her three older brothers report the incident between Jin-kyung and Dae-seo to their father. The elder brother, In-jae, tells his father that Dae-seo is the best graduate of Seoul University. Hearing this, Jin-kyung's father seems very happy because he will have a future son-in-law from a highly educated circle. Elsewhere, Dae-seo then meets his girlfriend and tries to explain what really happened between him and Jin-kyung last night. However, Yoo-jin doesn't seem to care about this and is authoritarian towards Dae-seo, so he can't help but obey her words. With all the trouble that befell him, Dae-seo then decides to go for a drink at a diner selling soju by the roadside. Dae-seo receives a phone call from In-jae telling him that Jin-kyung's father wants to meet him. Annoyed, he throws his phone into the boiling pot of food in front of him. The next day, Dae-seo comes to Jin-kyung at work and asks her to do a virginity test at the hospital. Hearing this, Jin-kyung then feels offended and slaps Dae-seo until his nose bleeds. At night, Dae-seo, who is fond of astronomy, observes a cluster of stars that glow brightly in the night sky. However, his joy soon vanished when he was again envisioned by Jin-kyung's three older brothers who began to terrorize his life. It's really very annoying. Not long after, Jin-kyung visits Dae-seo's apartment to return the clothes she had previously borrowed and tells him that she is willing to do a virginity test at the hospital. The next day, In-jae goes to his father to report the results of his investigation about Dae-seo's background, who turns out to be a law scholar, and Dae-seo's father, who turns out to be a former military colonel. The more impatient Jin-kyung's father wants to marry his daughter to Dae-seo. Jin-kyung and Dae-seo then decide to visit Jin-kyung's father's residence, where they are greeted with great fanfare by Jin-kyung's brothers to the accompaniment of a marching band and wreaths like guests of honor. After that, they rush to the residence of Jin-kyung's father. Arriving there, Dae-seo looks both shy and scared when he faces Jin-kyung's father. The man then hands over the results of the virginity test that Jin-kyung had taken, which showed that the woman was still a virgin. Instead of canceling the wedding, Jin-kyung's father wants to speed up their marriage even more after finding out that his daughter is still a virgin. However, Dae-seo then refuses because he thinks that a marriage should be based on two people who love each other. Getting rejected from Dae-seo, Jin-kyung's father then feels angry, then cries and wails to his wife for not taking care of their daughter. Seeing his father crying in frustration, Jin-kyung's brothers then cried with their father. Dae-seo, still feeling irritated, tries to express his annoyance at lunch, but Jin-kyung asks him to be patient since her brothers are still keeping an eye on them. In the evening, Jin-kyung's brothers take Dae-seo out for drinks and get drunk together. The next day, Dae-seo and Jin-kyung intend to return to Seoul. Jin-kyung's father then gives Dae-seo some money to ask his daughter out on a date. On the way to the station, Dae-seo, still annoyed that Jin Kyung's father refuses to call off their wedding, decides to stop by the office of a prominent lawyer there. After meeting with the lawyer, Dae-seo then explains the problem he is experiencing and asks for protection from coercion and threats by Jin Kyung's family. At first the lawyer agreed to Dae-seo's request, but after hearing the name of Jin Kyung's father, the lawyer immediately cancelled it because he didn't want to have anything to do with that man. Apparently the lawyer knows the background of Jin Kyung's father, Jang Young-jong, who turns out to be a crime lord who is highly respected in the city. The lawyer then gives Dae-seo a choice, marrying Young-jong's daughter or committing suicide. Meanwhile, In-Tae hires a handsome model to seduce Yoo-jin. A few days later, Dae-seo and his parents are waiting for the arrival of Jin Kyung's family because they will have a family gathering before the wedding. Dae-seo then complains to his parents and says he was forced to marry Jin Kyung because her family threatened him. Dae-seo's father tries to calm his son down and says he can handle it since he was a respected former military colonel. But then, after meeting Jang Young-jong and Jin Kyung's brothers, Dae-seo's parents shrivel up and ask Dae-seo to marry Jin Kyung immediately for the safety of all of them. After that, Jin Kyung comes to a restaurant at Yoo-jin's invitation. She turns out to just want to insult Jin Kyung and her family, which makes Jin Kyung angry and corners Yoo-jin, who she thinks is just a selfish and materialistic woman. Jin Kyung and Dae-seo then meet, where again Dae-seo scolds Jin Kyung and threatens to report her family to the police station for acting as anarchic-like gangsters. Jin Kyung, who can't stand because people continue to insult her family, then bursts into tears in Dae-seo's arms because in truth, her family is not as bad as people think. The next day, In-tae's male model, Min Seok, visits Yoo-jin's boutique and asks her to design her clothes. Seeing Min Seok's burly and athletic body, Yoo-jin also seems interested in the man, which is exactly what In-tae wants. In the evening, Dae-seo goes with his friends to a karaoke place to have some fun over drinks. However, to his surprise, Dae-seo and his friends find out that the bills they have to pay are hundreds of thousands of won. Because Dae-seo is reluctant to pay, the manager of the karaoke place then orders his men to be rude to Dae-seo and his friends. Dae-seo then calls Jin Kyung's brothers to confront the manager's men. After everyone was beaten by Jin Kyung's brothers, who were indeed mafias, the manager of the karaoke place then reported the beating incident to his boss, who was none other than Sang-pal, the leader of the Do-sang family, a mafia family known as the rivals of the Jang family. Sang-pal is angry that the Jang family is causing trouble in their territory, then orders his men to kidnap Jin Kyung. Knowing that their sister has been kidnapped by Sang-pal and his men, Jin Kyung's brothers are determined to bring their sister back with help from Dae-seo. Jin Kyung's brothers and Dae-seo finally meet Sang-pal and his men in an abandoned stadium. In-tae then asks Dae-seo to save Jin Kyung, while he and his brothers will face Sang-pal and his men. Dae-seo manages to save Jin Kyung, which surprises her brothers. After successfully rescuing Jin Kyung and defeating Sang-pal's men, Jin Kyung's brothers then went to Jin Kyung's house. While Jin Kyung is treating her wound, In-tae asks her about her feelings for Dae-seo. But Jin Kyung says she's also unsure of her feelings because Dae-seo already has a girlfriend. Seok-tae and Kyung-tae then take Dae-seo out for a drink that night, even though Dae-seo has already refused because he has an important meeting at his office tomorrow morning. While at the bar, Dae-seo accidentally sees his girlfriend making out with another man, but he chooses to remain silent. While returning home in a state of chaos and drenched in heavy rain, Dae-seo is approached by a security guard at his apartment building who gives him a gift from a woman. Arriving at the apartment, Dae-seo then opens the gift and is surprised that the gift is a gift from Jin Kyung. On the other hand, Jin Kyung gets a gift of a cute puppy in the name of the gift from Dae-seo. In fact, all the gifts were part of the Jin Kyung's brothers' plan to bring Dae-seo and Jin Kyung closer together. A few days later, Dae-seo and Jin Kyung have dinner together and both don't know about the parcel which they both think was sent directly by each of them. But both of them pretended to understand so as not to be awkward. On their way home, the two are suddenly trapped in a jammed elevator, which turns out to be part of the Jin Kyung's brothers' plan. As time passes, and after spending a lot of time with Jin Kyung, Dae-seo begins to like Jin Kyung. Especially after he never communicated again with Yoo-jin, who had been making out with another man. While observing the constellations with Jin Kyung at night, Dae-seo compliments her on her beauty and kindness. But Jin Kyung tries to act casual, thinking that Dae-seo and Yoo-jin are still dating. One day, Dae-seo gets a delivery at his office, which turns out to be from Yoo-jin, who returns all the items Dae-seo gave them during their relationship, signaling that their relationship is over. Even so, Dae-seo is not at all sad. One night, Dae-seo and Jin Kyung again have dinner together, but Jin Kyung seems uncomfortable at the restaurant because it's too crowded. Dae-seo says that Jin Kyung is too conservative and introverted and suggests that she be more relaxed and open and meet more people. Jin Kyung looks surprised when she hears Dae-seo's words, which turns out to guess correctly about his personality. The restaurant manager, who seems to already know Dae-seo because he often comes there, then offers Dae-seo to enter a singing competition at the restaurant. The winner will get 2 vacation tickets to Saipan. However, Dae-seo then politely refuses. After that, he says goodbye to the toilet for a while to Jin Kyung. Apparently Dae-seo plans to propose to Jin Kyung that night without coercion. When he was about to return to the table, he was taken aback by Jin Kyung, who was singing while playing the piano. But suddenly, Yoo-jin, who was very drunk, came over to Dae-seo. At first Dae-seo doesn't want to respond to her, but because she collapses from being too drunk, Dae-seo is forced to take her home. Jin Kyung, who saw this, could only hold back the pain in her heart. Dae-seo then takes Yoo-jin back to her house and lays her on the bed. Yoo-jin tries to seduce Dae-seo, but he is unfazed. However, unbeknownst to Dae-seo, his cell phone had fallen on Yoo-jin's bed. On the other hand, Jin Kyung tries to call Dae-seo because she has waited too long at the restaurant. But it turns out that the one who picked up Dae-seo's phone was Yoo-jin, and Jin Kyung felt very frustrated and devastated, thinking that Dae-seo was still in a relationship with her. When Dae-seo returns to the restaurant to pick up Jin Kyung, it turns out that Jin Kyung has left there and only left a box of fake stars, his favorite thing. Dae-seo goes to Jin Kyung's apartment, trying to explain what happened. But Jin Kyung is already disappointed and doesn't want to meet him. The next day, Jin Kyung decides to go back to her father's house. On the other hand, Dae-seo gets an email from Jin Kyung saying that she will see her father and her brothers to cancel their marriage and ask her family not to interfere and make life difficult for him anymore. However, Dae-seo, who has already fallen in love with Jin Kyung, doesn't want to cancel their wedding and rushes to his car to catch Jin Kyung, who has already gotten into a taxi and is about to head to her father's house. The scene then switches and shows Jin Kyung and Dae-seo getting ready for their wedding. Both of them seemed so happy because they knew each other's feelings, and it turned out that they both really loved each other. But in the joy, In-Jae gets word that Sang-pal and his men are about to launch an attack at the wedding reception. In-Jae then asks his brothers to confront Sang-pal and his men, while Jin Kyung and Dae-seo will perform a wedding blessing and soon be made a legal husband and wife. However, Sang-pal and his men manage to defeat Seok-tae and Kyung-tae, so In-Jae had to intervene alone against them with his father's help and a married couple, Dae-seo and Jin Kyung, who had just married. This film is fairly light and has minimal conflict, even though it carries a mafia theme. Through this film, we are shown Dae-seo and Jin Kyung, who initially do not know each other and are involved in an unintentional incident until finally united in a marriage bond based on love, which shows us that everything that happens in this world can be predicted by us, and if two people are destined to be matched, then it will happen, no matter what.